Well, ever been a bored final tower boss with every new human that came through? You call them toys, with that the only fun you had. No, then how about your life finally ends when one powerful toy comes along one day and slays you, and in your final moments, you plead to God that you could become the toys you played with.
Give me a chance, girl, give me a chance, give me a chance, give me a chance.
Having felt jealous of their freedom all along, then if your wish was granted by a mysterious red system, what would you do? Well, welcome to our Manhwa recap for today. I used to be a boss. Enjoy. The story starts with our protagonist showing the audience his different toys, which in theory should be nothing special, right? Well, yes. But if our protagonist is a demon who happens to be the final boss of a tower, then his definition of toys might shock you, because, for him, toys were those unfortunate warriors who tried to defeat him. However, contrary to what you might think, Baphomet was not happy. Yes, he didn't lack toys, which were of various types. Nevertheless, they all had one thing in common. They were fragile and ended up breaking, dying to be precise, after a short while. Sure, the moments when toys visited him were the events that gave him the greatest thrill, but those were his moments of greatest despair. To add insult to injury, he couldn't leave the tower to go to the world where the toys lived, so he was forced to wait aimlessly until a new toy appeared. Exciting, right? Yes, I'm being sarcastic. But one day, something happened. One of the toys left a smartphone behind, and when the next toy appeared, Baphomet made him teach him how to use the device. That opened a new world and gave him a new hobby to enjoy inside the tower. In fact, he recalled all the items he had collected from the toys he had defeated, able to know a little bit more about their lives. Sadly, the more he knew about the world where the toys lived, the more his desire to see that world, not the illusion before his eyes, grew. He then recalled a superstition the toys had that a being called God granted them wishes. In fact, he went as far as to ask that God to fulfill his wish. Eventually, the next toy arrived, but that one was different. That toy was stronger than the others. Baphomet even labeled it as a toy of the highest grade. In fact, he began to get fired up during their battle, feeling emotions he had long forgotten. Finally, he was having the fun he had always desired to have. However, he began to feel envious of the toy, and also began to lose the battle, and the toy even taunted him by saying that despite being so powerful, he was trapped inside the tower. Baphomet couldn't believe he had been defeated by a mere toy, by a simple human. But he also wanted to become like that too. He wanted to escape from the tower and become as free and strong as that human. In fact, he wanted to become a human. Those thoughts triggered a quest, and a mysterious system sent him a message. His wish would be granted if he killed the hunter. That boosted his strength, and he managed to kill the hunter before dying. The next thing Baphomet knew was that he was outside the tower while possessing a human body. Those who fought against the monsters that existed inside the gates and towers were called hunters. In that world, the position of hunters hadn't been that great until a gate shock occurred. That phenomenon happened when a tower wasn't dealt with for a long time, resulting in monsters breaking through the gates. That day, 1/3 of the world's population was wiped out, and from that moment onwards, the importance of hunters skyrocketed. Back with Baphomet, people mistook him as the hero who had cleared the Abyss Tower, although, for some unknown reason, he had lost his powers after the final battle. Of course, without powers, he lost his status as hunter. Can you lose what you did not have in the first place? And ended up becoming the backstreet leader of the dungeon quarry, referred to as Hung out of respect. On a certain day, in the quarry of some dungeon, a newcomer joined the workers in charge of the manual labor in that dungeon's quarry, and he had the chance to meet Hung. At that moment, Hung's group was seen as nasty delinquents who had crawled their way into the mining ground and who would persistently bully someone they didn't like. In reality, after losing his status and being labeled as a con artist, Hung hit rock bottom. To make things worse, he got injured and was operated on by a quack doctor, and since he didn't have any money to pay her at that time, he had to send her all the money he earned at the quarry. However, it was not that bad since he could keep a low profile. After all, his downfall had been broadcast nationwide. Although some fellas recognized him, eventually he ended up beating them, which eventually led him to become the leader of the delinquents. And before you ask, no, that was not the vision he had when dreaming of going to the world where the toys lived. He didn't know why he had lost his powers, but at that moment he really wanted to have real power, the power of the hunters, not the useless one that was enough to beat powerless humans. After all, hunters were revered and lived luxurious lives. Nevertheless, he eventually realized that his new friends made him feel what he wanted to experience, enjoyment, and the best part was that he didn't have to fight or be powerful to feel it. Sadly, at that moment, one of his followers about to give him his name, as he had abandoned his original. As he was about to be told, a blaze of fire engulfed him. As he recovered from the shock of the attack, he had not just lost the one toy, but all of them. In realizing this, Baphomet was really pissed off and wanted to know who had done it. Apparently, the newcomer in reality was a hunter who stole the spoils in dungeons, and he had been the one who had killed almost everybody. Afterward, he opened a portal to let his accomplices in, so they could all abuse a female hunter he had just defeated. However, before they could begin enjoying the woman, Baphomet appeared, beheaded one of them, and asked the others who had destroyed his toys. Since Baphomet had felt anger on behalf of a human, the mysterious system had given him the power he desired. In fact, when he took the weapon of a hunter who had been killed by the newcomer, the regular system warned him that its performance would be reduced to 0%. But almost immediately that system was hacked by Baphomet's passives via the mysterious system. Thanks to Master of Weapons and weapon theft, he could use the weapon without receiving any penalty. The leader of the criminals didn't take Baphomet seriously, but he still sent his accomplices to deal with him in order to gauge his strength. Right after, our protagonist crushed the minions which excited their leader, who immediately thereafter attacked Baphomet. They both began to fight, and the leader quickly managed to wound him. In fact, he got the upper hand in the battle thanks to his chainsword. However, because Baphomet was seriously bleeding, another of his passives called Outburst triggered, increasing his abilities by 15%. At that moment, the leader felt real danger and began to take the battle seriously, although he was still confident in his victory because he thought he could drag the fight long enough to consume our protagonist's stamina. Who is going to tell him? Unfortunately for him, Baphomet released his killing intent, and the leader felt like he was fighting against a demon. Well, he is literally fighting one, so that impression made him hesitate, and that cost him an arm. Afterward, our protagonist kept severing his other limbs as penalties for the toys the leader had taken from him, and once there were no more limbs to sever, Baphomet dealt the finishing blow by stabbing the leader's heart as the penalty for making him angry. Well, to be fair, that anger allowed him to regain his strength, so shouldn't he be rewarding him instead? I'm just saying. Baphomet kept stabbing the leader while the mysterious system warned him that a heavy consequence was bound to follow those who sought power. Right after, Outburst triggered a debuff called Berserk, which made the person yearn for murder. He then began looking for victims and found the woman who was about to be abused by the criminals, but when he was about to kill her, 2 special agents arrived at the scene. That attracted our protagonist's attention, and he immediately attacked them, but a mysterious being quickly put him to sleep while saying that keeping Baphomet alive had been quite difficult, and they couldn't have him die at that moment.
What?
To the agents, it appeared that Baphomet inexplicably collapsed, leaving them baffled. As he regained consciousness, he recalled the words of the hunter who had slain him. "If you believe yourself all-powerful, you're merely a frog in a well." Baphomet suddenly woke up and noticed he was inside some facility, and a voice coming from a speaker called him by the nickname the media had used to mock him. However, the person was not stupid and noticed that the alleged con artist had managed to kill the hunter they had been chasing. He then asked him if he had really killed him, or if he was trying to pull another scam. They probed him relentlessly, baffled by the void surrounding his existence, but Baphomet, far from cowering, erupted in anger. He railed against the sudden hero status thrust upon him, the confinement that now held him captive, and the relentless questioning from behind cold walls. By the way, he also admitted to having killed the man they had been chasing. The man who was talking to him began to laugh and entered the room, daring him to attack. Baphomet saw him, and since he resembled the hunter who had killed him, he immediately attacked him, but the man beat our protagonist with ease. Although that confirmed to him that our protagonist had indeed awakened. This stranger belonged to a clandestine government guild called Rogue, dedicated to halting criminal hunters. Rumor had it that wealthy elites sought immortality by receiving organs from the awakened. The man Baphomet had slain, a hunter who preyed on innocents, peddling their organs like macabre commodities. Baphomet's actions were a paradox. He'd eliminated a menace, yet his brutal methods hinted at a darker past. A novice wouldn't orchestrate such carnage. As for our protagonist, he was pissed off, but he also had to admit that the other man was very strong, so he couldn't do anything except listen to him while cursing his weakness. Sometime later, at Hunter's Central Administration headquarters, Baphomet was trying to register as a hunter. That man had offered him to join their ranks since he had recognized his talents. In fact, they solved his identity issues, despite knowing that our protagonist might become a threat in the future. In the end, our protagonist managed to register, and he even used Baphomet as his code name, while thinking that they would regret having given him that opportunity, because he would become the strongest, and would make them tremble with fear upon hearing his name. Baphomet was killing various werewolves, and realized that his strength hadn't fully returned. Then, after recalling the message of the mysterious system, he concluded that he had only gained back the strength to kill that specific criminal. After all, that was his desire at that moment. At that moment, an agent appeared and showed him a smartphone. Right after, his recruiter, via video call, complained about Baphomet picking the name of the tower's boss as his alias, after being told not to do anything to draw aggro toward himself. He also informed him that the official investigation had determined that the tower had been cleared by Hunter Raven. The top hunter in South Korea had died after sacrificing his life to kill Baphomet. Baphomet was taken to Jeju Island and he got flabbergasted after seeing the sea for the first time. Afterward, Taeyong informed him that he had been taken there to participate in a training program. It was a must for newbie hunters, with the government making it a rule. Afterward, he gave him an ID card, some luggage, and a smartphone. According to the card, our protagonist's identity was Cha Min-woo, the name given to him by the toy that had been burned in the quarry. Right after, Baphomet entered the building for orientation and discovered that the one in charge of the lecture was Ma Seong-un. Ma Seong-un was a member of the Central Hunter Management on the outside. That's why he could be officially there. Nevertheless, shortly after, while the recruiter was getting worried after confirming some A-rank hunters would be joining them, Baphomet was exhilarated since he could finally try those amazing dishes he had seen on the smartphone. However, before he could eat, an A-rank hunter decided to spoil his fun. Of course, Baphomet didn't back down and responded to the provocation, causing a headache to his recruiter. To make things worse, our protagonist began to taunt the A-ranker, and the hunter threw a punch at him. Luckily, another hunter arrived and blocked the punch while reminding them that fighting there was against the rules. And to make things more interesting, that one hunter was Raven's younger brother. My friend, it seems you even managed to piss off fate too. Griffin, Raven's younger brother, was the youngest A-rank hunter, but that didn't stop the other A-rank from complaining about being blocked. After all, Baphomet had badmouthed Raven when taunting him. However, Griffin didn't mind those words. In the end, Ma Seong-un had to intervene and take Baphomet away while Griffin kept staring at him. I guess he did mind those words. Later, Ma Seong-un told Baphomet that he needed to lay low since he still wasn't strong enough to earn the respect of the top hunters. After all, at that moment, he was nowhere near defeating an A-rank hunter. Those words seemed to have an effect on our protagonist, who began to behave a little better afterward, even when taunted. Later, Baphomet decided to go see some friendly matches between A-rankers. There, a hunter called Leon had won 8 consecutive duels. He decided to challenge Griffin, who happened to be there. The duel began, and it was a tough one, but Raven's brother, who was still in middle school, by the way, ended up winning. Griffin then challenged Baphomet, and Ma Seong-un allowed it, since he wanted the newbies to see how big was the gap between new and veteran hunters. And yes, he also wanted Baphomet to be beaten to cure his arrogance. The fight began, and almost immediately, it was clear that Griffin wanted to beat our protagonist to a pulp. Moreover, even though passive and active skills were not allowed, Baphomet was becoming a sandbag for Raven's brother. Eventually, Griffin stopped the fight because it was pointless to keep going, and that disturbed Baphomet because he wanted to see Raven's brother's real power. Our protagonist then remembered what Ma Seong-un had told him about being weak, and that triggered something within. Baphomet then taunted Griffin and attacked him. Sadly, for our protagonist, Raven's brother kicked him so hard that he sent him flying through a window, and Baphomet ended up falling into the pool that was outside the building. To make things worse, he couldn't swim, but while he was losing consciousness, he thought that he had gotten a rough idea of Griffin's skills and looked forward to the day he crushed him. He also looked at a gorgeous blonde woman with blue eyes swimming towards him. Let's not forget that. Baphomet had some kind of fetish with blondes, and since the woman was very close to him, he tried to grab her hair, which led to a struggle. The next moment he had a strange dream about getting a weird job that consisted of being hunted by humans, and I used to complain about mine. Baphomet woke up and kept staring at the blonde woman who was unconscious beside him, but he was pulled out of his reverie by a purple-haired woman who seemed to be pissed. In fact, 3 women were staring at him, and all of them looked annoyed. Ma Seong-un arrived at that moment and recognized the purple-haired woman as Echidna, CEO of the guild called ARC. Unfortunately, for Ma Seong-un, Echidna began complaining because Baphomet had torn some hair strands from their guild's representative hunter. You guessed it, the blonde woman. In the end, Echidna demanded Baphomet pay 116 million as compensation. That sent Ma Seong-un into despair because he knew that woman was obsessed with money. At that moment, he was convinced that taking our protagonist there had been a terrible idea. To add insult to injury, Baphomet used his outstanding diplomatic skills to make things escalate by defaming the blonde woman, who happened to be a very popular S-rank hunter called Valkyrie. In short, she was a celebrity. Baphomet, my friend, I think it is time for you to shut up. Echidna then said he could pay with his body by working for them, which triggered his trauma with the quack doctor. Our protagonist then yelled at her and blamed Ma Seong-un and Griffin for everything. Apparently, Griffin worked pretty well as deterrence, because Echidna began to mind her manners, although she insisted on receiving compensation. Luckily, Ma Seong-un said they would take care of it and offered her exclusive rights to a tower for 1 year, which was an amazing reward, since their guild would get all the profits produced by the tower during that time. Echidna pretended to hesitate for the sake of reputation, and then accepted the offer. Shortly after, the blonde woman woke up and Echidna's group left, and as they did, Valkyrie winked at Baphomet in a playful manner, which baffled him. Sometime later, Griffin followed our protagonist and asked him how he had been able to snatch the cloth he had during their duel. Apparently, before Griffin kicked Baphomet, the latter had managed to take it, which, in theory, made him the winner. What happened next, you might ask? Simple. Our protagonist guessed that Griffin was angry because Baphomet had killed his brother before he could do it, due to his lack of killing intent during their duel. Raven's brother, on the other hand, guessed that our protagonist was not a human, thanks to the killing intent he had unleashed during their duel. The result? Baphomet became amused and told Griffin he looked forward to the moment he found out his true identity so they could have a battle to the death. After Baphomet safely finished the orientation program, Ma Sung-un told him he had found a place for him to live. The place was a traditional-style house that looked old. In fact, Ma Sung-un thought our protagonist would hate it, but Baphomet surprisingly liked it, which left him flabbergasted. Should I point out how Griffin had become a stalker, watching Baphomet in secret during the entire program? Nah, I am sure that won't be important. Sadly, there was no time for vacations, and our protagonist was assigned his first task. He would have to monitor the mentor to a group of new hunters. The idea was to lure his boss out, but the problem was that the boss would probably be stronger than our protagonist. By the way, the mentor's name was Quitch. Sometime later, Baphomet joined the group when they were about to enter a D-rank gate that led to a dungeon filled with D-rank monsters so that Quitch could teach them the basics of hunting. Baphomet looked at them while recalling his mission to get closer to the mentor in order to obtain information about his crimes. The group began hunting, and Baphomet quickly got Quitch's attention because our protagonist was by far the best of the group. His talent was astonishing, and he even made killing monsters look effortless. In fact, the mentor suspected Baphomet might be an irregular. As for Baphomet, he was getting tired of fighting weaklings and was thinking of a way to get the mentor's attention. Luckily, at that moment, Quitch forced the final boss, a death worm, to appear. Our protagonist knew he couldn't miss that chance, so he stole the sword of another hunter and insta-killed the monster. Everybody, the mentor included, was impressed after witnessing Baphomet's showcase of power. Nevertheless, our protagonist soon realized he had used the wrong strategy for getting closer to Quitch, because the mentor said that he could start working immediately as an independent hunter. Translation, he wouldn't be able to stay with the group. Deeper meaning, he had screwed the entire operation. Our protagonist tried to do some damage control, but to no avail, and later he had to report his failure to Ma Sung-un, who admitted he might have tasked him with something too difficult from the get-go. Afterward, our protagonist's recruiter gave him a new task, a simpler one, to eliminate a C-rank hunter who was a criminal. Baphomet managed to complete the new task flawlessly. He even disposed of the body by taking it to a dungeon so it disappeared after he killed the boss. However, the thought of the mentor annoyed him, but getting close to him was out of the question at that moment. Nevertheless, that didn't dissuade our protagonist, who began to stalk Quitch in order to better understand his prey. Unfortunately, after some time, he couldn't find a single piece of dirt on him. He thought of using violence, but then dismissed the idea since he had to do things in the way of humans. Luckily, his perseverance paid off, and he eventually found a clue, a woman called Yu Hyun, whom the mentor seemed to care a lot for. Afterward, he faked an accident and fooled them both into thinking he had saved her from getting hit by a car. The woman then invited him for dinner, and while he was eating, he began to suspect the woman, who happened to be Quitch's wife, was special. Of course, the mentor was also present, and he began to ask questions to our protagonist, but Baphomet threw him a curveball by casually saying he knew he had already lost his wife before. That astonished Quitch, but before he could react, our protagonist began narrating the details of the accident, while thinking that the mentor's reaction had just confirmed to him that the woman had already died long ago. Quitch and his wife had always been together since elementary school, and even throughout high school. In fact, they believed that the marriage they had always dreamt of would keep them together forever. Spoiler, they were wrong. One day he was told to be an irregular, and although his wife didn't like the idea of him being a hunter, at first she supported him, but eventually to please her, he ended up quitting his job as a hunter to become a mentor. He only wanted her to be safe and happy. To achieve that, he even gave her the teleportation device he had been given due to his job. That would take her to the designated evacuation facility in case of an emergency. Sometime later, the gate shock occurred, and his wife was caught in the middle of the chaos. Luckily, she had the teleportation device, but when she was about to use it, she dropped it while trying to save another woman, who ended up stealing and using it before she could react.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
In the end, the mentor's wife was killed by a monster. The thing was that Yu-hun couldn't understand why she was still alive, as according to her memories, she should be dead. On the other hand, Quitch followed the clues given by Baphomet and arrived at the address of the owner of the car who had tried to kill his wife. However, once he went inside, he was shocked to see that his wife was there, and she was not alone. Baphomet was there too. Our protagonist then began to taunt the mentor by rubbing in that his wife was dead, although Baphomet couldn't help but be intrigued by the fact that she was still alive. In fact, he wanted to know exactly how she had been revived for her to have ended like that. Moreover, she had gotten motionless, like an idle engine, after realizing she was dead. Of course, those provocations made the mentor mad, and he attacked Baphomet, who immediately threw the woman through a window. That crushed Quitch, and he simply kneeled while our protagonist asked him if he could revive her again. The mentor then summoned his weapon, and Baphomet did the same. Right after, both began to fight. The battle was intense from the start, and none of them could get the upper hand. Furthermore, Quitch began to recall out loud his relationship with Yu Hyun. It turned out that the evacuation facility had also been attacked by monsters during the gate shock, which led the mentor to think that his wife had been originally fated to die. Of course, he couldn't accept it, and at that moment he used a forbidden skill called Windows of Heaven. Back to the present, Baphomet had learned something he shouldn't have, so Quitch decided to kill him to be able to revert everything. Baphomet remained unimpressed by his mentor, casually severing the man's right arm. With a condescending tone, he chided Quitch, claiming the fight had ended the moment his emotions took hold. Disappointment gnawed at our protagonist because the epic clash he'd anticipated fizzled into mediocrity. As for the mentor, he failed to grasp Baphomet's motives. Our protagonist then revealed his grim occupation, hunting criminals. Quitch, however, justified his actions, citing a desperate need to keep his wife alive. Baphomet scoffed, accusing the mentor of sullying the very concept of evil with flimsy excuses and a half-hearted resolve. He abandoned the quest for the boss's identity, opting to end the mentor's life instead. However, at that moment, the system informed both of them that a monster had appeared due to a system error, so all the hunters in the vicinity should subjugate it immediately. The target in question was Yu-hyun, who had mutated into a huge monstrosity that looked like a tree. The smell of blood awakened the beast, and it lunged at Quitch, who stood defenseless. Right after, Baphomet's rage surged, and he slashed the monster, activating his outburst passive. The ensuing battle wasn't easy, but it wasn't insurmountable either. During the battle, Baphomet detected a malicious energy emanating from the woman, which kept making him feel sick. He just couldn't believe a human had been able to create something like that. After killing the monster, Yuhun's head fell in front of Quitch, who still was processing what was happening in front of his eyes. Internet Explorer is faster to launch than this guy is to process emotions. Complicating matters, the outburst passive triggered the Berserk debuff, fueling our protagonist's anger. Not that it mattered, since Baphomet had already resolved to end the mentor's life. But fate intervened. The enigmatic system detected a threat and initiated a lockdown. Baphomet's relentless skill usage had pushed his threat level to 99%, prompting the system to shut down bodily functions until the danger subsided. Okay, now that's what I call a debuff. To add insult to injury, Quitch finally reacted, and after seeing Baphomet couldn't move, he went for the kill. As for our protagonist, he was cursing the system for screwing him over. Nevertheless, at that moment, the mysterious system talked directly to him and said that it had no reason to screw him over because it cared about him most of all. Okay, what subgenre of romance is this? In that instant, Ma Sung-won materialized, rendering the mentor unconscious. The recruiter then admitted that, despite the chaos, Baphomet had unearthed damning evidence linking the mentor to the crime. Ma Sung-won even commended him, but our protagonist seethed. His prey had slipped through his fingers, snatched by Ma Sung-won, the enigmatic system, and his own vulnerability. In the end, Ma Sung-won administered a tranquilizer to Baphomet, dispatching him in an ambulance. Yet, during the return journey, he and Tae-young discussed the monstrous anomaly. Someone or some group had twisted not a living person, but a corpse into a malevolent creature. Ma Sung-won also interrogated the mentor, who was in the car with them, but Quitch deftly evaded his questions. Then calamity struck, the car's brakes failed, and the mentor's body metamorphosed into a monster. Quitch's ominous words echoed. Catching the mastermind would be no easy task. Moments later, the car crashed. Baphomet woke up and ended up falling from the stretcher out of terror when the quack doctor appeared. Right after, he asked her why she was there, and she told him that he was in her hospital. She also added she was surprised after knowing he was working with Ma Sung-won, whom she might seem to know. She then began to tease him by touching his body, taking advantage of the fact that he barely could move. When Ma Sung-won finally arrived, Baphomet was on the floor after passing out, and the quack doctor was laughing hysterically. Is she pure evil or just a cougar? After regaining consciousness, Baphomet noticed Ma Sung-won looked horrible and inquired about it. Ma Sung-won then told him about the accident and that the mastermind had killed the mentor. The worst part was that they hadn't been able to find any clues from the remains of Quitch's body. That pissed Baphomet off because the other had blown up everything after all his hard work. Well, welcome to the life of a salaryman, my friend. Ma Sung-won didn't like his attitude and mocked him for thinking a merely B-rank hunter could have done better against the mastermind, who seemed to be an S-rank hunter. In the end, our protagonist left, and the agent asked the quack doctor if she had stolen Baphomet's money under the guise of treatment. She then revealed that when our protagonist arrived at her hospital, she recognized him as the famous guy they had been talking about on TV, which made her realize the government had failed once again in its selfish efforts to try to create a heroic hunter. Right after, she said that a red system window had appeared before her. She was surprised because it was not a blue one, but what shocked her was the message. The system threatened to kill her if she did not save the protagonist. That was why she had used the fake debt as a way to keep observing him. Of course, that revelation astonished Ma Sung-won, as they weren't aware of that. Should I mention the quack doctor found it romantic how Baphomet was receiving intense love from that system? As for our protagonist, he decided to use his vacations to finally enjoy being a human. So he ate in restaurants, walked through the city, practiced sports, watched movies, read books, and watched street performers. But in the end, he didn't find any of that fun. He even began to wonder if becoming a human had been a good idea. At that moment, the system asked him if he was sad, which made him question his sanity. However, while Baphomet was ranting at the system to the point of asking it to kill him, the administrator of that mysterious system, a beautiful white-haired woman, was finally able to hack Earth's system. Immediately thereafter, everything around our protagonist froze, and after some introductions, the administrator appeared before him. She then explained to him that she hadn't given him his powers, with that the only way he did not lose his life, according to the trillions of simulations she had run. That genuinely surprised him, and she told him that he would fulfill her desire, plus he had called for her. He smiled, because it seemed that God had fulfilled his wish, and, after hugging her tightly, which caught her off guard, he asked her who had killed him in those simulations, because he assumed it should have been someone stronger than him. She told him that there were several individuals way more powerful than the previous him, so he had to get stronger to survive. However, what shocked him was that apparently, one of those individuals was Raven. Right after, she improved all his skills. For example, Outburst was converted into Adrenaline, and it would no longer fall under Berserk. Moreover, he received several new skills. Afterward, time resumed and the woman was gone. Meanwhile, Ma Sung-eun asked the quack doctor to inspect a sample from the monster Baphomet had defeated, and the woman gave him Baphomet's updated stats, which astonished him, because our protagonist's strength had increased tenfold in a short amount of time. As for our protagonist, the mysterious system informed him that since he had completed the hidden quest, Judgment of Apostle of Rage Raven, he would receive Raven's unique skill as a reward. What a start. What happens next? Does he end up in some administrator cheeks? Like the video if you would like to find out and comment what you think. For more recaps like this, check out the channel and turn on all post notifications to know when a new video or part comes out. Subscribe if you enjoy the videos, and thank you for watching.